Hi, I'm Kate Fulb. I'm director of Hollywood Health and Society. We're a program of the USC Annenberg Norman Lear Center, and our mission is to provide free information and access to experts on a wide variety of topics from health, medicine, science, safety, and security. We're here to help creative people get the facts straight so that you can tell the stories you want to tell. Today, we have an amazing discussion. Top 5 things you need to know about death and dying, but we're afraid to ask, right? So this is a topic that I'm sure you know doesn't get as much airplay on TV and film as it might deserve. And I'm not talking about murder and killing. I'm talking about end of life and going through, dare I say, a healthy end of life experience. Couple of housekeeping things. As we get started with our panelists, we're going to be putting their bios in the chat, so we don't spend a lot of time doing introductions. So please refer to the chat if you want to know more about our illustrious panel. And also, we have our speakers pinned at the top of your screen, I think, but you can also, if you choose to, go to the setting of hide non-video participants, and that will hide everybody else in the room. And as a participant or as a guest, you're welcome to turn your camera off and just watch the panel. We will be going into breakout rooms later. You don't have to do anything. We will send you off into your breakout room and we will bring you back. And this part of the panel, the main discussion, will be recorded. We will not be recording the breakout sessions, so we want everyone to feel comfortable being able to ask questions and talk without knowing that it's being recorded. We will record at the end, again, the wrap up with Q&A. So that's all the housekeeping. Again, welcome. Glad you're here today for this interesting discussion. And here to start us off, please welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider.
Hello, everyone. As Kate said, thank you all. I'm Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider. I'm a practicing internist physician. I'm the founder of the nonprofit End Well, focused on making the end of life a part of life. I'm really delighted to be joined by our expert panelists today, Attica Locke, Dan Fogelman, Dr. Ira Byock, Dr. Michael Fratkin, and Alua Arthur. And for their full incredible bios, please do see the chat. If you have questions during the panel, drop them into the chat and we can definitely address them either here in the panel or even in the breakouts after the panel. And as Kate mentioned, following this panel, we'll have additional breakout sessions, which will be led by Claire Bidwell-Smith, who is a therapist specializing in grief and a best-selling author, as well as Samantha Trad, the National Director of Care Advocacy for Compassion and Choices. Again, just a quick disclaimer here. This panel is being recorded, but the breakouts won't be. Okay, so why are we all here today? I can tell you from my personal and professional experience that far too often people die in ways that don't match their goals and their values, and ways that don't honor the life that they've lived, and far too often involve suffering. We do know that 80% of people want to die at home, but on television, only 20% of characters shown dying a non-violent death are at home while dying. Over 95% of deaths portrayed on TV are violent, while only 4.3% are from an illness. We know from research that characters are more likely to die from a supernatural event than from a terminal disease. And in our research with the Lear Center, we looked at over 84,000 TV and film scripts between 2010 and 2020 and found that only 2.9% mentioned end of life in some way. And this doesn't include violent death, which was significantly more represented. So today we hope to share with you about the wide range of experiences and choices that exist for people at the end of life. And this audience really has a unique opportunity to create the stories that reshape the cultural attitudes around this topic and really invite viewers to confront their own mortality and embrace the steps that we all need to live fully until the very end. So with that, let's jump in. I want to start with a Lua. So what are some of the most important things that people should know and understand about death and dying, but often don't?
That's such a big question, Shoshana. Thank you for asking it, and also for just hosting this in general. I'd say maybe the top three things that I wish that people knew about death and dying is that we can create a deathbed, we can create a dying experience that serves us, but it requires us to be aware of and acknowledge that death and dying is occurring. So we can create a dying process that serves us. Also that it can really be beautiful. It can be beautiful. We think of it as difficult and hard, and we want to rally against it and recoil in fear and discomfort. But when we open and allow, it can be really beautiful. And lastly, I'd say that it is as natural being in the presence of somebody who's dying. It feels as natural as everyday life does. It feels as natural as birth does. It feels as natural as getting up and taking a shower, that it feels like a regular part of life when you're in the process with somebody. Those are the top three, I'd say.
Thank you. Really quick, for the audience, we're gonna do a quick poll, which I believe Kate will make available to folks. So if you can see that on your screen, participate in the poll, and we'll keep the conversation going. And it's about death and dying on screen. And Ira, Dr. Byock, I think your audio hopefully is working.
Yep, I'm back.
Okay, welcome back. Question for you. One of the things that I get most frustrated with, well, one of the things in the media, often print media, is the conflation of hospice and palliative care. Can you talk a little about this, okay, and why it's important to make an accurate distinction between them?
Sure. Thanks for having me and doing this as well. Let me start briefly by saying all of my comments today are going to be framed around thinking about the screenwriter's perspectives. And for screenwriters, you know, you folks tell compelling stories about personal experiences of your characters. I think for me, categorically, three of the most profound personal experiences are births, sex, and deaths. The deaths of yourself and the people you love. And not just at the fact that they died, but how they died, how they were cared for, and what they experienced in the months, weeks, and days before their actual deaths. Getting the medical part right is so critical, because if we don't get the medical part right, people are in pain, or they're breathless, or they're constipated, and they don't have energy and attention for the personal parts of these most poignant, profound human experiences. To your question, palliative care, I think, is one of the most important medical advances that most people don't know about. It hasn't involved cutting edge technology, and to this point, not a lot of AI and that sort of thing. But organizationally, as a delivery model, it's a remarkable achievement. Palliative care is basically now a formal subspecialty in medicine, frankly, but it is a team-based approach that involves interdisciplinary team-based approach, which involves doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, social workers, chaplains, at times doulas, and that brings this integrated team to serve people's comfort and their quality of life, to manage symptoms, to make sure that what we're doing for them is what they actually want, that we're not working simply on disease-based algorithms and the like, but this comprehensive team-based approach to meet their needs, to anticipate their and their families' needs, because dying involves not just the individual, but the family, and to really make this difficult experience, preserve it for the realm of the personal, to help them get as much out of it as possible. Hospice is what started all this, but has become a delivery model for palliative care, and is focused mostly on people in their homes, but also people who are dying and frankly acknowledge that they're dying. Part of the tension in American healthcare is it's not sufficient under Medicare to be dying to get hospice care. You also have to agree you are dying, something which many of our patients are not willing to do. And you have to be willing to forego treatments for your disease that may help you live longer in order to get this comprehensive package of services. Palliative care is available upstream from acknowledging that you're dying, and often concurrent, simultaneous with disease-based treatments.
Thank you so much. And that final piece that you said, I think is really important, because if people think that palliative care is just for people who are like actively dying, they're not going to be able to access it years upstream from the end of their lives.
That's
and
right.
Use it alongside chemotherapy or some other potentially curative intervention. So with that, I want to go over to Attica. What do you see as the biggest barrier to portraying storylines about end of life and grief on TV?
Ignorance, just the things that people don't know, and also to go against the culture of making things pretty, because death and dying and grief can be cinematic. They don't have to be so pretty. And that's, you know, even, and I don't want to call anybody out, but I even remember when we were filming the from scratch and all the scenes, the end days of waiting where the families gathered and going through that time where you don't know when it's coming. And the costume designer had to ask me 7 times, are you sure you want them all in the same clothes? Every single day. And I was like, yes, they're in the same clothes. Nobody's going home. Nobody's showered. Like, they're in the same clothes. But she was so afraid that I was going to regret it later. But I kind of knew you wanted to feel like you were in a time outside of time, and that you weren't like tracking days, because that's what it feels like. Just having to usher people along to not have things look the way they've always looked, and to be willing, in my opinion, to go for that. You can have something be cinematic without necessarily having to be pretty and tied in a bow, because grief and death and dying for me sit on this line. There's this exquisite fine line between the grotesque and grace, between absolute wretched pain and total exhilaration and beauty. I really, what Lewis said about the beauty of death, to be with someone, or to be the someone who is walking out of life by their own choice and how they want to do it, is a beautiful thing. That's so I don't know that I answered the question, but it's literally just being willing to do things differently. That we may have seen it look this way, but how about we try to make it look in a way that isn't so prettily wrapped up in a bow, kind of thing.
Okay, Dan, over to you. In This Is Us, was it important to you to depict Rebecca's end of life authentically? And if so, tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, it was. We worked really hard to, speak to get the disease right, to get the perspective on the disease right from the caretakers. That was a big part for us. The family members. It's a very complicated disease with a very long run. And so in our particular show, she's suffering for quite a while, and so it really is a disease. That particular disease is a disease for the family. It's a disease of the family, and so yeah, we tried to work hard. In a writer's room, you have a bunch of different writers, and we'd all been, I've been severely touched by great loss, and to all the things everyone is speaking about here, some of the biggest, boldest moments of my life, and most beautiful have happened in those moments, and this merged with the sadness in a big hot mess. And so, yeah, for me, it was really important to get the death of a matriarch right, as well as the specifics of her particular disease and what it did to the family. Our writer's room was touched by the specific disease as well as just general loss, and so it was kind of important to all of us to use our own experiences and try and treat it real. allow it to be sad when it was sad, allowed it to be beautiful when it was beautiful. What Attica was just speaking of, trying not to make it just consumable for television, but also hopefully speak to people who have undergone great loss.
And I just have to say thank you for that. I really, really appreciate that that time and attention you gave to it.
Yes, thank you.
Elua, have you ever had clients who were influenced by media portrayals of death and dying? And if so, how did you address any misconceptions that they may have had?
All the time. All the time. We learn so much from the media that we take in. And people often think, for starters, that everybody dies with their hands crossed like this, or that, everybody just goes off so like this. They are surprised by some of the signs of dying. People are often surprised or don't understand that a lot of people die with their mouths open, because it's much harder, it takes a lot more muscles to keep the mouth closed than it does open. And so they think there's something wrong. I think there's something wrong when they don't look like they did when they were living still, when they're at the end of the disease process. And so a lot of my work is about educating what dying actually looks like, as opposed to what we've been told it looks like, because we've seen it that way in movies and such. So education about, big education about what the process of dying is, how it appears in real time, in real life, can really do a lot to push how we die societally and our embrace of it forward.
Okay, Ira, similar question for you. How do you approach conversations with patients who may have unrealistic expectations of end of life care, of CPR, based on what they've seen in movies or TV shows?
Lots of people have unrealistic expectations. Modern medicine is so good at fighting disease and keeping people alive, and it's gotten harder to tell when somebody is dying over my years of being a doctor, because late stage treatments for things like cancer and heart failure have gotten so very good, and we want to make all good use of them. Good communication always starts by listening. We have to sit down as a physician. I sit down, I lean forward, and I start by listening, learning who this person is, because the best care for any individual is highly particular. I can know a lot about their main disease and usually their other conditions, their high blood pressure or diabetes or whatever else. But ultimately, the best care is in taking the technology and medicine and matching it to the person's condition, but also to their personal preferences, who they are as a whole person, who matters to them, what their ethnic and religious background has been and how that informs them. So I start by listening, asking them what they know and have been told about their condition, and then trying to gently get a sense of what they would value most as we sort of turn shoulder to shoulder and look forward into the future. People aren't stupid, and they know that dying happens. They may not have been formally informed or thoroughly informed about where they are in the course of their life and their medical conditions. So again, I start by listening. I gently, as I build trust with people, I try to reassure them that dying doesn't cause suffering, frankly. Resistance to dying causes suffering. Nature has been very gentle with us in giving us ways of leaving this life in a gentle way. Our organ systems gradually fail. Our liver creates toxins normally that it doesn't clear. And it's when we interfere by striving to keep people alive of maybe longer than nature intended, if you will, that causes continued suffering. So I try to reassure them and then try to get a sense of what success would look like, frankly, in their life, in their perspective, in their, again, ethnic and cultural background, to leave this life in a gentle way.
So Attica, with From Scratch or other shows that you've been a part of, how do you approach writing characters who are dying or experiencing grief in a way that really feels authentic and respectful?
I am helped by the fact that I've not only experienced these things in my life, but have experienced them with having to have a sister who, Timby says hi to everybody, by the way, happen to have a sister who has spent so much time around this work. So we've been very awake to these things. So I try to approach everything with great honesty, trying to stay true to the particular character that's been created, but using what I know from books that I've read, from people that I've talked to, also knowing how varied it is, that how people respond to grief, that actually gives you a kind of like freedom in portraying something very specific to a character. Because if you told me somebody did anything after somebody lost somebody really close, anything you tell me they did for the next 6 months, I would believe it. Did they decide to fly a plane? Did they decide to like run naked down, the 405? I would believe it, because grief is so disorienting. So reading lots of things, listening to people, the podcasts, the things that you guys do, taking in that information gives you like a base level to pull from, what is universal about the experience, and then how can I take that universal and then make it specific to the actual character that I'm writing about. And you said, when you said respect, I mean, you treat all of this with great reverence, respect for the situation, but honesty to me is the most respectful thing. That to downplay the power of grief, to color it in a way that isn't accurate, is disrespectful. So that's kind of the way I think about it.
Dan, have you ever had to compromise on a storyline about end of life or grief due to concerns from network executives or sponsors? And if you have, how did you handle that?
No, not really. I mean, they kind of left us alone on that show. That was one of the benefits of it becoming popular quickly, was they just kind of all got out of the way. So that was good. I think we were, I mean, our biggest debate was we were self-monitoring. That particular show had started, and all anybody would talk about was people were crying all the time. It was just like, there were tissue boxes with logos all over our offices, and it was a little bizarre. And then we knew we were heading towards this like kind of long, slow demise of like one of the more popular characters on the show. And there were a lot of like, when I had kind of gone to my guys and said, this is a show about memory and time, and Alzheimer's makes sense as the disease, is kind of what I've had in my head. There was internal debate of we are making everything we're talking about here, we're making a television show, and is it too sad? And is that what people are and we had long debates over it. I felt very firmly it's what I wanted to do, but I wanted to pretend to listen to everybody else. And so but yeah, then I mean, that was the goal, to find, like we're all speaking about finding the beauty inside of that, finding the doing it not just because it was sad and going to make people make more tissue boxes with logos on it, but to try and say something. And so we never got pressured from the people in positions of power over us. We self-generated our own neuroses.
Great. And Attic, I'm going to come back to you because I know you have to jump in 3 minutes. So last question for you. Have you ever received feedback from viewers who found that a storyline about end of life or grief, particularly moving or meaningful? And then how did you react to that feedback?
I'm humbled by it and proud. We have received a lot of feedback from people who felt seen, who felt that their experience of the end of a loved one's life felt real, and that the mirror itself was so invigorating or affirming. And also people who were looking at a picture of grief that we weren't done within the third act of episode, whatever. Like, it really kind of stretched it out, and so the feedback has honored me deeply. It makes me feel like, oh my God, all of the difficulties were because there were every show is hard to make, but our show was a doozy. I like to say it was hard for a lot of different reasons. So when I hear that feedback, it makes me want to do more. It makes me want to, it reminds me of the power of this medium. And it makes me want to do more.
Dan, I have that same question for you with feedback, and then I'm coming back to Ira and Elua.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we get a lot of feedback. I mean, sometimes a lot of our feedback is people yelling at us that they don't like what characters wound up dating other characters. But so I mean, I had a blessed life of like I was one of those lucky people until I was 20 years old where I didn't really experience any loss in my life. I had my grandparents died old. I wasn't that close with them, and so when they did, it wasn't traumatic. And then in my early 30s and late 20s, I just started experiencing loss after loss, like pinnacle, major, massive losses. A couple of young friends, my mother, my aunt. I was at all the bedsides at the end, all the things we're speaking of. And but one of my best friends died about 5 years ago now, and he was very much like Dr. I'm sorry, Bayak was saying. He was resisting, and he had a long bout with cancer. This is too long of an answer. Is this too long of an answer?
No.
He was battling. He was a big Brooklyn-born, handsome, strapping guy who just got this unrelenting cancer out of nowhere. And through all of it, he was a man about town, and the medicines were really keeping him in really good shape. And then it kind of hit really quickly at the end, and he was resisting it. And he had called me to come to New York. He was crying. It was the first time. It had been after 5 years. He said they're saying hospice all of a sudden. And that was a big thing for him. And so I had gone to New York to kind of go and have some talks with him. And while I was there, he was just kind of powering himself through, not listening to anyone. And he fell. I sat with him one night, and then he was refusing to let people stay in his apartment with him, and he fell. And he called me, and we were driving to the hospital together, and in a taxi, and it was brutal. And he said, just we were sitting on this bumpy ride. He was in a lot of discomfort, and he said, he asked me if out of nowhere, just sitting in that car, he said, "Do you think you would want to be buried or cremated?" And it was like the first acknowledgement from this guy who had refused to accept any of it for many years. He was one of my best friends. And I said, I don't know, Alex. I haven't thought about it. I think I think buried for me. I think that. And he sat there for a while, and then he said, "Why did you have the Jack character in an urn in the show?" And that had been weighing on him, that I had cremated the main character, and he had been sitting with that for a while. And I said, "Honestly, Alex, I think I did it because I just wanted people to think he died in a fire." I didn't have an answer for him, and he said, "Yeah, that's what I thought. I think like." But it was a very striking moment to me that this guy was battling huge, gigantic questions that he had resisted for 5 years of illness, and he was going towards a television show and why decisions were made that way. And I thought that was a really interesting moment. And that's not general feedback. That's just one specific story.
Dan, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up the panel, but we have a lightning
Yes,
round.
I'm gonna go.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
I made it too
This
sad.
was
I made it too
honor.
sad for you.
Yeah, we're done.
Not at all. Not
In-
at all. I
I
have a
do,
notes call in like 2 minutes.
thank you so much.
Anyway, I'm
Erica.
so thrilled to have been here. I think that
Me
you
too.
guys are doing work, and with everybody who's listening, that's going to inform their writing and their storytelling, that's deeply going to change lives. This is very meaningful work, and I'm just honored to have been a part of these brilliant minds and big hearts that are doing this stuff. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
I have a lightning round for Elua and for Ira. I want this is a tough one. In 6 words or less, what do you wish television would get right about death and dying? Elua.
Real, messy humor, the best of humans, the worst of humans, that's just one, and joy.
And joy. Yeah. Okay, Ira, you get the last word here.
That illness and dying are personal. They're only partly medical. And I think this is us from scratch. I'll throw in Ricky Gervais's Afterlife, get that all right.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, panelists. I so appreciate your time. Please know, audience, that you're going to be placed into your first of 3 breakout sessions here in Zoom. And this happens, I believe, automatically. So you're going to have 3 separate opportunities to dive into content with our expert facilitators. We're talking death doulas. We're talking psychedelics at end of life. You can get any question on grief or medical aid in dying that you want answered. So stick around. And Endwell has created tip sheets along with our friends at the Lear Center with curated expert information for content creators, which are available at a link that we're going to drop into the chat, as well as on the Hollywood Health and Society website. I'll make sure that that gets into the chat if I can figure out how to talk at the same time as typing here. So check out those tip sheets. And I just thank you all so much for being here, and enjoy these breakouts.
I think since everyone's busy and have a lot on their plate, we'll just wrap it up. Thank you all so much for coming. Again, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out and we'll connect you with those who can answer them. Thanks to our panelists and our breakout leaders, Sam, Elua, and Ira, and Michael for jumping in at the last minute, and Claire. Thank you all. And Claire, thank you. Sorry for your technological issues on our part, and thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And take care.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone.